Going live with Microbalance Health Products. It's Dr. Hart. Tonight, we're talking about long COVID and mold, understanding the deep rooted connection here so that everybody can figure out what's going on. First of all, guys, this is not considered medical advice. It is for your informational purposes only. I want you to know we're live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube, we're live on Instagram. So throw your questions in. The team is going to pop them up for me. I'm going to answer as we go so that we can get everything started and get your questions answered. Really important to know, guys, there's a blog associated with this live stream. You can go to sinusitiswellness.com and you can read all about long COVID and mold. So let's dive in, okay? Because COVID, right, it just regulated the entire world. We hit that standpoint and it hit us from all sorts of angles, okay? But what really quickly started to happen is that people weren't recovering after they had COVID, right? You recover from the flu, maybe it takes you a week, 2 weeks, but you bounce back. You get a cold, you bounce back. But people weren't bouncing back from COVID, and quickly we started calling this long COVID. And so people are trying to figure out what to do about it. Is it a lingering infection, right? Do you just continue to have the virus? And that might be true for some people, but what else was going on? And so what we saw was going on with that, with long COVID, is multiple fronts. And thank goodness for research, but also clinical experience. So one of the great things that popped up is that people with long COVID had a much higher propensity to being exposed or living in water damaged buildings. And what happens with water damaged buildings? Mold. These people had a much higher propensity to have biotoxins in their system, which was suppressing their immune system, creating mitochondrial dysfunction, allowing their COVID symptoms to linger, even if you didn't have mold symptoms before. What we saw in practice was that people who had maybe no symptoms or very little symptoms before COVID got COVID and then suddenly developed long COVID, and really trying to help support the body and dealing with the virus or anything like that wasn't really working. What was going on? Run the tests, and then research started to back this up, that it was really, they had water damaged buildings. They had mold exposure. They had biotoxin illness in their system. They had mycotoxins and endotoxins. They were keeping their body from recovering from the COVID. COVID ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back, but really the root cause underneath that for a lot of people ended up being mold exposure. And we saw this in the research, right? The research is now coming out with that, but also we were seeing that in practice. So when we were testing patients coming in, we were saying, hey, yeah, I can see long COVID on your markers, but what was lingering was really mold exposure, okay? That's a biggie there for people who are struggling and not sure what to do with long COVID. But let's talk a little about long COVID. Let's talk more about what is it. Maybe you don't know what it is. You're dealing with it. You haven't been right since COVID, but what's going on? Okay. So long COVID is after you have COVID, after you get that acute infection. Maybe you had the runny nose, headaches, body aches, shortness of breath. Maybe you had no taste or smell, right? And then you sort of recovered from the acute illness, but you had lingering symptoms. So let's talk about what some of those symptoms are as we deal with this. So fatigue is a big one. That I'd say is the number one symptom I see post-COVID and that long COVID setup. Just debilitating fatigue, exhaustion, can't push through. Another word for that too is post-exertional malaise or exercise intolerance, right? Just completely wiped out for days after exerting yourself is a big one. Body aches, muscle aches, also known as myalgia, right? Muscle pain, lingering joint pain, is a big one. On and off fevers, relapsing fevers is another. You could have anxiety, depression, even psychosis that occurs, that shows up where people start to get neuropsychiatric symptoms is a big one. Headaches and perpetuating headaches or migraines. Neuropathies, which is like nerve pains or numbness, tingling. You can have a reactivation of other infections, okay, in there where the immune system gets suppressed and those other infections reactivate. Rashes. POTS, which is basically to say low blood pressure upon standing with your heart rate going up. So you get lightheaded, dizzy, weak in that front. So that's another big symptom that we see on that front. Visual changes, loss of taste or smell that never fully recovered is another big one. You can have blood clotting issues. You could have mini strokes. You can have in there hypertension, a worsening of diabetes, a worsening of kidney issues, a worsening of any sort of metabolic syndrome like type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, cholesterol issues. Those have all been shown to be made worse by COVID. Okay. So those can perpetuate into long COVID. Hair loss, right? A lot of people experience the hair loss that occurred with COVID. And a big reason for that is the total body shock or stress of the symptom. And most people recovered their hair after 6 months. But if you didn't, that's another symptom of long COVID. You can have brain fog, cognitive issues, poor memory. And so all of these factors play into symptoms of long COVID. So if this sounds like you, make sure you pay attention here as we go, because thank you to Microbalance Health Products, we want to help inform you of how you're going to deal with this and how to improve. Okay. So, like we talked about in the article, I see two big issues that occur with long COVID that aren't allowing the system to recover. Okay. Number one is the water damage mold exposure. Okay. So people in water damaged buildings get mold exposure. Those mycotoxins suppress the immune system. They make hormonal changes. And maybe it wasn't enough to really give you a ton of symptoms until you got COVID. And now, boom, you're spilling over to symptoms. So that's number one. Okay. Now, how do you test for that? How do you know what's going on? You can do a urine mycotoxin test, which we do in the office. But the other biggie we do is we'll have patients test their home. You can use the EC3 mold plates to tap test furniture. You can air test. I love to do a nasal swab test and see what's growing in people's noses and sinuses. You can tape it to HVAC vents, heating, cooling vents, all sorts of stuff on that front so that you can figure out what's going on in there. Are you dealing with mold? Now, for me, I don't want anything more than one spore, right, to show up on there. But really anything above 3, we know we've got a problem. Okay, so that's going to tell you, hey, we've got some mold exposure issues here for us to deal with on that front. Okay, that's how you test on that. See, is my environment the problem? The second factor we see, guys, and as we're going here, if you guys have questions, I'm looking at my emails here as the questions come in. Guys, if you have questions, make sure you throw them in the chat. Team's going to throw them in for me so I can see as we're going. Okay, and so the second factor is mitochondria. Oh, somebody's asking about mold. Let me jump in this one. I've been using the Citru Drops nasal spray. Guys, that's a great nasal spray from Microbalance. Allergies, helping the body deal with mold exposure, that sort of thing, for several weeks, and it seems to really be helping my chronic sinusitis. I'll continue it. How long will it take to get rid of sinusitis? Great question, because we do see this in long COVID as well, because if you got that lingering sinus congestion. Now, typically I see somebody needs to really treat with this for 90 days. But here's the key, is if you have chronic sinusitis, whether it's long COVID or mold or both, you need to test your environment. The research has shown, Dr. Dennis, who helped start Microbalance, he did some great research on it and found with chronic sinusitis, if people have more than 3 mold spores on their mold plates, they're going to have a very difficult time recovering from chronic sinusitis. So we can fight it back and treat the root cause with the Citru Drops nasal spray, but also we need to make sure we're not continually getting exposed. So test your home, tap test the furniture and carpets, test your nasal cavity, air test the space, and see what to do. And then if it's there, right, you can get a mold inspector out if it's really bad to see what the source is, but you can start to battle it back. And one thing we tell patients is like, look, if you know you've got exposure, start fogging with the EC3 fogger weekly, if not more often. Get some good HEPA filters in there, change your HVAC filters regularly, start fighting back. But that's the key. So typically you need to treat with it for 90 days, right? But you need to make sure your environment's clear too. How do you clear the head and sinuses from mycotoxins? Thank you. Right. So we don't just want to clear the fungal exposure. We're going to clear the mycotoxins, because even with long COVID, what's going on is those mycotoxins are suppressing your immune system, right? They're creating mitochondrial dysfunction, which we'll talk about in a second. That creates fatigue, that creates a lot of the body aches, that sort of thing. And it's suppressing your hormone function through your pituitary, adrenals, gonads, that sort of thing. So we really got to clear these mycotoxins for long COVID and mold. So number one, you need a good detox protocol. You need some great liver, gallbladder support, some lymphatic support, right? You can check that out on Microbalance Health Products page. So you can do some good liver support. You need good binders. You need to be binding up these mycotoxins to help liberate them from the system. As long as you're not dealing with gliotoxin, you can use glutathione, especially for the central nervous system, to clear that out. So that's a biggie. And then how do you clear it out of your sinuses? One of the things I like to do is we use the nasal rinse. We use the NasoPure, which you can get on the Microbalance page. Or like if your practitioner carries those, we carry those from Microbalance. It's a nasal flush. You can actually put a little bit of binder into that nasal flush and then flush it through, and it'll grab some of those mycotoxins and then flush them back out. I like that, especially if I know I've taken an acute mold exposure, like I went into a moldy place. I'll do that after, so it'll grab that stuff and flush it through for me. So that's a great way to do that. Somebody else is asking, how do I know if it's long COVID and not adrenal fatigue? This question's a great question. I really like this question because it's important. And number two, it goes in this next session. So what's the second thing that we see with long COVID? It's mitochondrial dysfunction. Long COVID triggers a cell danger response. It tells the cells they're in danger, which flips our mitochondria. Right? What did we learn in school? Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. They make our energy, right? Well, they have a second factor. When it comes down to a danger response, they flip from making energy to defense. Actually, they go from a bean shape to a ball shape. Isn't that crazy? And so they go to making these defense. We call it a cell danger response. What happens with that? The cell stiffens. It quits making as much energy. It lowers its methylation status, which that does a whole host of things. But when that happens, when the methylation status goes on, other chronic viruses, like for instance, Epstein-Barr virus, can't be inhibited because methylation inhibits viruses or chronic viruses. So that allows Epstein-Barr virus to now reactivate. Okay, so that happens. And so when that occurs, when these mitochondria go from energy states to defense states, and we can actually think of this like a good analogy is World War II, right? When World War II occurred, we shifted a lot of our manufacturing from making products for at home, or what we might call like energy, like energizing our economy. We shifted our factories to making defense supplies for the military. That's what happens with long COVID. Our cells go from making energy, our mitochondria go from making energy to making defense molecules. And so when that occurs, we're going to get exhausted because our mitochondria aren't making energy anymore. Okay, that's what even with viruses, that's what causes that cell danger response, is what causes the fatigue with a virus. Okay, so the difference between adrenal fatigue and long COVID is that exhaustion is not from the adrenals not being able to adapt to stress. It's that there's nobody making energy, right? And so you can think of the adrenals in a car. The adrenals are our accelerator. They're our gas pedal. They don't actually make energy themselves. They tell our gas tank to deliver energy to the engine. What's the gas tank? It's the mitochondria, right? So in long COVID, your gas tank is empty. You can hit that accelerator all you want, but there's no gas to accelerate, right? The difference is in adrenal fatigue is your gas pedal just doesn't work very well. So what I'll tell a lot of people is like, look, if it's your adrenals, a lot of times you can find a way to fight through it. You can take a little more caffeine. You can do something that excites you. You can get a little exercise in, it'll perk you up a bit, right? You can take some adrenal glandulars or some salt and it'll help. But in long COVID, like for instance, exercising makes it worse. You get more exhausted because you're drawing from a gas tank that's already empty. Typically, you can't push through, or if you do push through, you're more exhausted, right? That's a big difference there on that front. The secondary is the way we test, right? So when I test for adrenal fatigue, usually what I'm looking at is hormones. What is your cortisol doing? What's your DHEA doing? Those are adrenal hormones. I'm also looking at what's your salt like, what's your potassium like, right? So I'm looking at that for your adrenals. But on long COVID, I'm looking for other markers like succinate. Succinate is an amino acid that our mitochondria and Krebs cycle need to make energy. Well, in long COVID, that can be elevated. Why? Because it's stuck. It's not getting used to make energy because our cell danger response kicked in and our mitochondria aren't using anymore. We can have elevated lactic acid sometimes on those labs. We can see an imbalance in serotonin where you quit making as much serotonin and instead make inflammatory compounds. That's not common in adrenal fatigue, but it is in long COVID. That's where people start to get depressed. That's where they don't sleep as well. They start to get anxious. They start to get maybe sometimes exhibit psychosis or irritability, right? So those are big lab markers we can see. That's a big difference as well on that front. So for me, now, long COVID can cause adrenal fatigue to some degree as it depletes your resources, and then your adrenals start to get depleted, and then you'll also end up with adrenal fatigue. But for me, long COVID is distinctly different on that front, both in lab markers and how it looks clinically on that front. So that's also ties in, guys, that big factor. So first, with long COVID, we see water damage, building exposure, right? Mold exposure. depleting the immune system, depleting mitochondria, and having hormonal changes leading to long COVID. And then second, we see mitochondrial dysfunction. We see that cell danger response, locking the cell down, going from energy creation to defense mode. Okay. So somebody asked, is PCO technology legit for helping with mold? Right. And so what I see with PCO technology, what is PCO? That's photocatalytic oxidation, right? Basically, we're taking UV light, we're hitting it on a special type of metal, typically titanium. Okay, and when that UV light hits a titanium, we get an oxidation reaction. So it creates a reaction that releases a special type of negative ion called a hydroxyl radical. The hydroxyl radical basically is something that's put on the air. That's a lot of chemistry. But suffice to say, PCO is when light hits a piece of metal, that kicks off an ion. That ion can go in the air, kill mycotoxins, kill mold spores, viruses, bacteria, that sort of thing. Is it legit? It 100% is legit. It works. Okay. We recommend patients use them. Okay. It is not a solution to continue living in a moldy environment, right? But it does keep an environment clean and helps to combat mold spores and mycotoxins that are in the air. Okay. So I've seen it be very, very beneficial. Okay. It's not an excuse to not remediate, but it does help and make a difference. Okay. Vibrant Test or US Biotech for mold. Personally, okay, this is what we use in our clinic for urine mycotoxins. Our primary go-to is Vibrant. It's very sensitive and it works well. There's other labs as well that are good too, but that's what we personally use. Best treatment for gliotoxin specifically. I'm currently treating for babesia due to severity of symptoms, but no mold is an issue. Okay, so babesia is a parasite, guys. It can cause a lot of problems, POTS. It can cause fatigue, red blood cell issues, low oxygen. It can mimic mold and long COVID a lot. And actually, a lot of the remedies that are good for babesia are good for COVID, like methylene blue, ivermectin, artemisia, those sort of things. There's a lot of crossover there, okay? But there's a biggie. If you're dealing with mold, it's going to suppress your immune system, so you're just going to keep treating babesia over and over. So you might have to deal with babesia, but really you need to deal with the mold exposure. I find people with these tick-borne infections or these blood-borne infections as well, like babesia, they'll treat it for 20 years. If they have mold, they need to deal with the mold toxin, so you quit suppressing the immune system. And the immune system can actually start to get back and help you fight back on the babesia. How you deal with gliotoxin specifically, gliotoxin is very neurotoxic, very kidney toxic, can suppress the immune system. It's really important if you have gliotoxin that you don't use glutathione, because glutathione can sometimes make it worse. That's sometimes why moldies react to glutathione. One of the reasons is because it can aggravate gliotoxin. If you have gliotoxin, it's important to use a broad spectrum binder, okay, like the bioactive binder from Microbalance Health Products. But the big key in there is it has humic and fulvic acid in it, and that can help with toxins that are in the central nervous system. It can help with toxins that are deep in the cells that humic and fulvic can. And then you got to use things that help clear the cellular system and the drainage pathways. So things that support the liver, gallbladder, kidneys, lymphatics. Those are biggies to help move that gliotoxin and then reduce exposure. So if you know you have mold, you need to be dealing with your environment as well. So use the EC3 mold plates, use the fogger, use PCO, use HEPA, use good inspectors and remediators to deal with those mold exposures externally in the environment. I would not use glutathione if I have positive gliotoxins. Now, look, if you have positive gliotoxins in a urine test and you're taking glutathione and you feel amazing, fine, go with what's happening there, because your experience is key, right? That's part of evidence-based medicine, is what's the patient experience. But in general, if I know someone has gliotoxin, personally as a practitioner, I'm not going to be using glutathione. You can still use NAC, but I wouldn't be using glutathione. Does fogging deactivate mycotoxins or make them fall to the floor for cleanup? I've heard both. Well, it does both. So depending on what sort of substance you use in there. So for instance, the Microbalance mold concentrate, if you fog with that, it does deactivate mycotoxins, it destroys mycotoxins. And it'll make mycotoxins and mold spores heavy and fall to the ground. So it does both. That's why it's important you after you fog, you use a HEPA vacuum on the floor and you wipe off surfaces with like a mold concentrate from EC3 or their enzyme solution. And you can also fog with their enzyme solution as well. So it's yes, and yes. Um, what binders do you think for aflatoxin? Well, the bioactive binder is the broad spectrum binder. It's got three, I think maybe up to 5 different types of binders. So it's going to hit aflatoxin. And guys, aflatoxin is a specific mold toxin, typically from Aspergillus, which, yes, you can find it in food, but really mostly I find it in water damaged buildings coming from homes or workspaces. And so bioactive binder is great on that front. Charcoal does it. Some probiotics grab it. Humic and fulvic definitely grab it, right? So those are great binders for that front. And again, I can't stress this enough, guys. Check the environment. Use the mold plates. They're very affordable. Buy 2, 3, 4, 5 kits and use them in all sorts of ways throughout the house. Tap test all your furniture. Tap test your carpets. Air test the rooms. Take them to the vents, right? We want to make sure we're testing from multiple angles. Swab your nose, right? So we keep cotton swabs in here, sterile cotton swabs. We swab people's nose and use them on the plates. We call that an off-label use, right? Because that's not technically labeled for that, but it's a great way to do it. Some other questions we had emailed: how to recover from post-exertional malaise. That means basically after you exert yourself, exercise, going out for the day, going for a walk, playing with your kids, you feel bad. Malaise is a medical term for I feel like garbage, right? And so how do you recover that after long COVID and mold? Really, post-exertional malaise is a telltale sign of a couple of things, but mostly telltale that your mitochondria aren't functioning well. So number one, we got to remove the root. What's causing the cell danger response? Have you cleared the virus? Are you clearing the mold and mycotoxins? So start on that. And then we can do mitochondrial repair. We can use thiamine, CoQ10, acetyl L-carnitine, phosphatidylcholine. Those are all great ways. There's tons are out there, but those are all great ways, along with methylene blue. You know, I know it's catching a lot of flack, but clinically it works great. It's fantastic for our mitochondrial. It's antiviral. It's anti-babesioal in the research, so it's great. And so, yes, and methylene blue is antifungal, guys, and it improves oxygen uptake. The research shows for long COVID and mold exposure. Now, I'm not saying you should go do this, right? Contact your medical provider. But what I'm telling you is the research shows that nebulizing, you're going to end up a little blue, but nebulizing methylene blue is a great way to help the body clear COVID. And it increases oxygen uptake, right? So that's a big front there. So that's a biggie. And then was there another question before that, guys? Can you go back to that one? I was told I have adrenal fatigue. What's the solution? Number one, why do you have adrenal fatigue? Okay. Your adrenal glands are really their job is to help you accommodate everyday stressors. Now, even standing up is a micro stressor that your adrenal glands have to respond to. So if you stand up too quickly and you go, ooh, I got lightheaded, what that means is your adrenal glands didn't raise your blood pressure enough to keep blood flowing to your brain. And that's why you get a little lightheaded, right? So if you have adrenal fatigue, why are your adrenal glands stressed? Are you too stressed? Are you not recovering well? Are you eating things you shouldn't? Are you not getting enough electrolytes? Do you have mold exposure? Do you have long COVID, right? What's stressing the adrenal glands? The next thing I see to help support adrenal fatigue, you can use adrenal glandulars, which are like little bits of adrenal glands. That's great. I don't like to start there, but it's a great way to help them recover. Electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, right? Support your electrolytes. Vitamin C supports that. And vitamin C helps naturally upregulate our body's glutathione production as well. So if you can't take glutathione, but you want to support that, you can do vitamin C. Okay, on that front, you can use adaptogenic herbs to help you adapt to stress. Ashwagandha, ginseng, lethal root, all those sort of things. How do you get out of the cell danger response? I'm out of toxic mold now. Okay, so if you're sure your environment is no longer moldy, right? And so make sure you test. Don't just assume. But if you know your environment's no longer moldy, number one, when you're in cell danger response, you got to remove what triggered the danger signal to begin with. So if that's mold and mycotoxins, you need to start a strategic detox plan. Make sure your drainage pathways are up and running. Are you pooping? Are you sweating? Are you hydrated to pee it out? Are you supporting your kidneys, your liver, your gallbladder, your lymphatics? Support those pathways with good supplements, healthy diet, movement, those sort of things, sauna therapies. Get a binder to pull that mold and stuff out. Get those things out of the system. So you got to remove the danger response. And then number two, you need to start supporting the mitochondria. So like we said before, I love thiamine. Specifically, I really like benfotiamine or allethiamine. Those are really bioavailable forms of thiamine, right? I love CoQ10, ubiquinol. I love methylene blue, carnitine, all different forms of carnitine, acetyl L-carnitine for the brain and nervous system, carnitine L-fumarate for the muscles and tissues on that front. So those are biggies on there that you want to deal with on that front to start supporting the immune system. Somebody else on Instagram said, I'm just looking at this other page, are calcifications, the hypothalamus, and other parts of the brain common? And are they somewhat easy to treat? They are common, unfortunately, and not always easy, but very treatable, right? And so that can be caused by heavy metals, mold exposure, fluoride, that sort of thing. And working to get that stuff out and repairing those is definitely very doable. What about ultraviolet light, like Unilever units? Does that really get rid of mold or not so much? Okay, so this is really important, guys. So in PCO technology, we're using ultraviolet light, but we're using it to shine against a substance like titanium to create a different unit. Ultraviolet light on its own does kill mold and helps to lower mycotoxins, but in most units, it doesn't have long enough exposure to actually do that in the air. Okay, so they're helpful, but they're better for bacteria and viruses than they really are for mold because they don't get enough exposure. Okay, so is that helpful? Yes, but is it really that great for mold on its own? No, because most units don't give enough air exposure because as the air passes through, boop, it's got that light exposure. It's not long enough to allow it to inactivate mold because it's too big of a molecule, right? You would need to have it steady for a time to clear that out in order to do that. So if you could have multiple units in a small space, they would work great. When it's in a HVAC unit, for instance, it just doesn't have enough exposure time, but it is good for viruses, bacteria, and that sort of thing. How does the Actinomyces bacteria, Actinomyces bacteria fit into all of this? Well, number one, actino, guys, is a type of bacteria that is common in water-damaged buildings, and they produce endotoxins, which perform very similar to mycotoxins. So typically, we'll lump that all into biotoxin illness. They're toxins from biological matter, like actinomyces, which is a type of bacteria or algae like cyanobacter, and with mold, which produces mycotoxins. They both can produce long COVID because it's that water-damaged building exposure. The way you deal with it is the same, though. Detox, handle your environment, that sort of thing, small particle clean, purifiers, fogging, all of that is a big go-to on that front. And that is with the Actinomyces too. I do like to rotate fogging different substances. You can fog the mold concentrate solution, but you can also fog Microbalance's enzyme solution to kind of hit both angles. So that's a great question on there. Let me back up and look at this other email on there. So they said, okay, I have mold, EBV, and heavy metal, and I'm told to treat heavy metal first using IV chelation. Ooh, be careful. Okay, and it would be easier to get rid of mold and Epstein-Barr virus later. Thoughts? First of all, okay, you got to deal with all of those at some point, right? That's true. Here's my thing about IV chelation. Most people can't tolerate it. And the problem is they're going to use typically something like EDTA, which is a chemical chelator, grabs heavy metals, which is fine. It's a good substance, or DMPS or DMSA. Those are great chelators, but when used in IVs, they're typically too big. So you're going to rip all these heavy metals out, and then you're just going to let them circulate in the body, right? So what you can't detox out in time is going to get redeposited somewhere else. So I've seen IV chelation put some of my patients into wheelchairs and things like that before they come to see us because it's too much too fast and the body can't detox that all out. So if you have heavy metals, typically the first thing to do is open the detox channels, which guess what? Is good for mold toxins too, right? And here's the biggie. If you're dealing with heavy metals and mold and you're still being exposed to mold, don't go detoxing the metals. Get rid of the mold in your environment first, okay? Because that's going to botch everything else up, okay? And then get on a good detox plan in general. Open up the detox channels because it's going to help you both with mold and heavy metals. And then later, do a good metal detox that follows solid principles that doesn't create bigger problems later. Now, lastly, with Epstein-Barr virus, typically something else causes it to get reactivated, just like we talked about with the COVID, right? Causing it to get reactivated. And so there's no point in trying to treat it early because it'll just keep getting reactivated if you have metals or mold, right? So deal with those first. But really, I would say deal with active mold, then metals, then help the body support the virus. But, you got to play with that. And I'm, again, personally not a fan of IV chelation, except for after doing a good detox protocol, and you're not going to make things worse. How do you lower archaea in the gut from mold exposure? That's a type of bacteria that can overgrow in the gut. And technically, we all have a little bit of that background there, but it can get overgrown from mold exposure. Number one, guys, get rid of the mold. Detox the mold exposure. Okay, make sure you're not continually getting activated because that can change your gut bacteria environment, the mycotoxins and the mold spores. So get out of the exposure or lower your exposure with good environmental measures, right? Test your environment, treat your environment, start a good mold detox program, and then you can decide, do I need to deal with leaky gut, right? Do I need to clear mold or bacteria out of my gut system that doesn't need to be there, like actual fungal overgrowth or bacterial overgrowth? That can be with great substances like oregano, berberine, grapeseed, stuff like that is great. And then when you're ready, add back in a great probiotic. And a lot of times, a really good probiotic helps to also combat those bacteria and fungus that are in the gut. And guys, finds mycotoxins. Best of all the worlds, right? So be strategic in that front. That's a biggie. Somebody else asked, does treating mold clear long COVID, or does COVID need to be targeted specifically also? The big part with that is the virus or spike protein still present? And we have to do testing to sort that out. If it is, we may need to support the body in clearing that directly. But regardless, usually helping the body deal with the mold takes away a lot of the need to treat specific infections, or at least it makes it way easier to deal with them because you're not immunosuppressing the body anymore. With mold exposure, the immune system is suppressed, and you're never going to be able to out-supplement, out-antibiotic, whatever, that immune system. We need the immune system. It's the heavy hitter, right? So mold is going to allow that stuff to linger. So we need to take away the immune suppression, and then we need to take away the inflammation, which the mold is causing. And then if something like long COVID or Babesia or Lyme is still present, it's a ton easier to treat at that point or support the body in dealing with at that point. Would a GI map and an O test give some insight on whether I have mold toxicity or not? It can. More specifically, the O test. The GI map won't necessarily tell you about mold directly. Although what I see in a GI map, guys, in stool testing, is that if your gluten antibodies, your anti-gliadin antibodies are elevated on a stool test, especially if you're not eating gluten. Okay, that's key. Because I'll have patients swear, I'm not eating gluten, Dr. Hart. I believe you. What we know in the research, I see this all the time in stool tests, is that mold exposure raises anti-gliadin antibodies. It can make you more gluten sensitive, right? So that's what I see in the GI map. But otherwise, it's probably not a great way to rule out or rule in mold exposure other than that anti-gliadin marker, that gluten marker. Oats test does give you some markers for mold exposure. It gives you some aspergillus and fusarium and arabinose that can help you say like, is this a factor? But it's not perfect on the front, but it's a very good test for long COVID. It helps you look at the mitochondrial markers and the neurotransmitter markers for long COVID. Really what I look for is like, first of all, do the mold plates, test your environment, test your nose, and then do a urine mycotoxin test to see if you're exposed on that front, to see what's in there. Those are the better tests I find for mold toxicity, but oats is okay. Why is NAC okay and not glutathione? Both contain sulfur, which aspergillus can use to make gliotoxin, right? So aspergillus can make gliotoxin, and it can feed on the sulfur to do it, but it's more the glutathione interacting directly with the gliotoxin that increases the neurotoxicity. Okay, those are some big words. So what am I saying there? The glutathione interacts with the gliotoxin, especially in the central nervous system, to increase brain toxicity. That's the big issue with glutathione and gliotoxin. Okay, so aspergillus can feed on sulfur, yes, but you're going to get that. Guess what has a ton of sulfur in it? Cysteine is steak, is beef, right? is meat, okay, is broccoli, is cauliflower, is Brussels sprouts, is asparagus, okay? So we're not going to avoid all those things. And those things aren't going to be shown to make aspergillus significantly worse or produce more mycotoxins. So the key here is number one, do you have aspergillus growth inside of you? It's called aspergillosis, right? So do you have a fungal overgrowth? That's a key factor there. And number two is NAC has its own effects that aren't direct to glutathione. So when you take glutathione, you're directly going to expose it to the gliotoxin. When you take NAC, you're going to ask the body, number one, to make more glutathione. So it's going to have an effect to some degree of should I or shouldn't I do this, right? And number two, NAC is going to have its own direct effects like thinning mucus, like and being its own antioxidant, like binding up to toxins itself, that sort of thing. And just plainly in the research and in biology, they don't have the same direct effect in the body, even though they're very similar, right? So that's a big factor. And here's the flip side. For us, we test that on our patients and we say, hey, is this going to be beneficial for you or not? We test each supplement with what they're dealing with. So that's a biggie. It's a great point there. How long are adrenal glandulars safe to use without further shutting down natural production? Great question. We use them with a lot of prudence, right? So what do I mean by that is I just don't put everybody in adrenal fatigue on adrenal glandulars. I like to use them. My preference is to use them only as needed. Hey, are you having a really down day? Try to use them only on those days, not every day. Or if somebody's really depleted, but they have enough resources, they have enough minerals and good mitochondrial function, we can use the adrenal glandulars to wake them up. But one of the other reasons I don't like to use them is not just shutting down natural production, but if somebody is they're stuck in fight or flight and it's depleting their adrenal glandulars and they're exhausted, and I give them adrenal glandulars, or their adrenal glands are depleted, and I give them adrenal glandular products, it's just going to put them back into fight or flight. Instead, I need to help regulate their nervous system so that they're not stuck in fight or flight and depleting their adrenals, and then we can re-nourish them. If I just give them adrenal glandulars, I'm basically just feeding the beast, right? So I try to use them only as needed and really sparingly on that front. I have shaking weakness in my limbs. They literally just don't want to work anymore, and also feel vibrations in my body. It's slowly getting worse with every menstrual cycle. Is that typical with mold and sears? I do see it a lot with mold. I do see it a lot with long COVID. I see it a lot with Babesia or Bartonella, where it creates inner trembling, shaking, tremors. We ultimately have to find out what's doing that to the nervous system to create that, right? So whatever it is, you have to see it. Is it very common with mold and sears, guys? If you don't know, is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is basically it's the symptoms of what biotoxins cause, the mold toxins cause. And so it's very common. And so you start the same though. Deal with your environment, detox the mold. If you got mitochondrial dysfunction, support the mitochondria. And then if there's leftover infections on that point, you can help the body deal with those. Guys, on sinusitiswellness.com, I have an article where I detail the steps of mold recovery. You can check that out. I think I have a live too on the Microbalance page, but I definitely have an article on Sinusitis Wellness about that where I talk about those steps. And so we need to assess in one of those steps, I believe it's step 4, we need to assess, is there background infections that are present like Babesia or Bartonella or long COVID that we need to support the body in dealing with. But it's only after we've dealt with the environment, we've started detoxing mold and mycotoxins, dealing with the inflammation from them, right? Balancing those systems, and then you can deal with that. So it is unfortunately common. Is itraconazole effective against mycotoxins? Plainly, no, it's not. It's an antifungal. It is effective against yeast, candida, and aspergillus as a fungal overgrowth, but it's important to note that with mold illness, you have 3 ways mold can affect you. It can be an allergy, which is typically the only thing that Western medicine looks at most of the time. It can be a fungal overgrowth, which they look at sometimes. That's where like aspergillus or yeast or candida overgrow in the body, whether it's the sinuses or in thrush in the throat, the tonsils in the lungs and the gut, right? Or, which is what we're talking about with mold toxicity, it can be what they call mycotoxicosis, which is where you have an overload of mold toxins, mycotoxins. Itraconazole is an antifungal agent. it kills the fungus. Especially, I I believe it's still the only pharmaceutical that's effective against aspergillus. So if you have aspergillus overgrowth or yeast candida overgrowth, itraconazole will help kill it. But if you're being exposed, you'll be killing it forever because you're just you're basically scooping water out of the boat with a bucket while there's a hole in it. So that's really important to note because I know there's a lot of practitioners out there who that's their go-to on that front. How the heck do you get rid of brain fog from mold that creates dissociative derealization sensations? So disassociation, guys, when like you don't feel like you're in your body. Okay, like, and so that can be a trauma response, but we also see that with brain inflammation, disassociation, and derealization is where you don't feel like life is really real for you. It almost feels like you're watching a movie from inside. Okay, that's very scary, depressing, can cause a lot of anxiety and panic when those things happen. So, a couple of reasons this happens. Number one is brain inflammation. Mold can cause brain inflammation. Number two is that it can allow infections to explode, which that is like Babesia and Bartonella. Those are two infections we see that can cause those exact symptoms. So you've got to detox, number one. You've got to get out exposure, number two, right? So you got to stop exacerbating that. Once you do that, we often see brain fog improve. But number three, then we got to see, is there any other byproducts from mold exposure and mold toxicity that we got to deal with? Is there lingering infections? We got to support the body in clearing. Do we need to directly support brain repair? One thing that Dr. Dennis loves that we like as well to help the brain recover after mold toxicity is oxygen therapy, right? Concentrated oxygen helps remove mycotoxins from the brain, helps to attack fungus in the sinus pathways, and it helps to kill anaerobic bacteria, but it helps for brain recovery. We add in a touch of hyperbaric at that point too, because it helps that deep recovery on that front. So it's a great way to look at as oxygen therapy, hyperbaric on that front. Best way to open up detox pathways. Thank you, Cindy. So guys, it's important not to try to do a crazy deep cellular detox until you're pooping. Are you having one daily bowel movement at least a day? That's the number one way toxins get out of the liver and gallbladders through our poop. So if you're not pooping at least once a day, you're toxic, right? And really, ideally, how many big meals a day are you eating? Are you eating lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? You should probably be having 2 to 3 bowel movements a day then, right? So you're getting all that junk out. Are you pooping? Are you sweating? Are you hydrated? Because the next place you get rid of mycotoxins is your urine. That's why we can test from the urine to our kidneys. So are you hydrated enough to support your kidneys? So stay hydrated and get pooping are the two number one ways to open your detox pathways. After that, you can use supplements to support your liver, gallbladder, kidneys, lymph. You can do things like sauna or ionic foot baths. You can do rebounders to get your lymph moving. You can do lymph massages, that sort of thing. And then a binder. Once you're pooping and your bowels are moving, you can use a binder to grab those toxins up. Those are the best ways to start that gently. Somebody else says, what if the duo of hereditary EDS, that's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, that's like the hypermobility, that sort of thing, or autoimmune issues is present? It's the same. It's the same, guys. You've got to deal with the things that are dysregulating the immune system and connective tissue first. If you're in mold exposure, get out of the mold exposure or start cleaning up your house. Then start detoxing mold out. Then deal with the inflammation. And lastly, you can deal with the other things that are caused. So if you have hereditary EDS, you might need connective tissue to support. You might need copper. You might need silica. You might need glucosamine, chondroitin, MSM, right? And you might need boron, manganese, all those factors to support good connective tissue health. If you have autoimmune conditions, deal with the mold, right? There's a reason your autoimmunity got triggered. And guys, with the long COVID, what a lot of people don't realize with autoimmune is the mitochondria are dysregulated, right? Every autoimmune condition has mitochondrial dysfunction. You've got to support the mitochondria in that front. So deal with the triggers like the infections or the mold exposure, and then help the body repair. What gives you internal vibrations? Mold, Babesia, long COVID. I get this kind of anxiety every few days. All of it can, right? It's typically a nervous system response to the internal vibrations. So then we have to say, what's affecting the nervous system? Is it mycotoxins in the brain? That may be a factor. Is it Babesia, which loves to aggravate, or Bartonella, which loves to get into the brain and aggravate those systems? Is it long COVID? All those can affect the brain. So it just depends on what you're dealing with and then what order we need to deal on them. But any of those can cause internal vibrations. Do digestive and proteolytic enzymes break down spike proteins? Great question, guys, okay? So let me walk a fine line here. Spike protein's a protein, so proteolytic enzymes can break down proteins. Proteolytic enzymes are a great way to also break up biofilms, also a great way to break up yeast, to lower inflammation, to break up clotting factors that might be a part of long COVID. So proteolytic enzymes taken on an empty stomach, which are a form of digestive enzymes, can help break down those proteins. And research does help say it helps people deal with the inflammation from spike protein and the clotting factors from COVID and spike protein on that front. So yes. Somebody else says, can treating mold COVID duo allow the autoimmune issues to go into remission, or will still need its own treatment? So I don't want to get too far into this with autoimmunity because it's its own whole thing. We could do 5 lives on autoimmunity. But autoimmunity has 3 things. Every autoimmune condition has 3 things. It has a trigger, like mold or long COVID. It has mitochondrial dysfunction that we have to deal with. Guys, can you see patterns here? Right? So you have to deal with that with autoimmunity. And it has immune cells that won't give up the fight, right? It's war veterans that won't go home, okay? And the immune system. So we need to deal with all 3 of those for autoimmunity. You got to deal with the trigger, which could be mold or infections or long COVID. You got to support the mitochondria, and you got to help reset the immune system. So that's a biggie. Do you feel EMA tests are good indicators for the absence of mycotoxins in a house if all negative? No, I don't like home mycotoxin testing personally, but the EMA itself does help test for mold as well. So that's a biggie. So the EMA is a good test. I just don't think you can only use the mycotoxin portion. It helps give you more information. And the biggest, okay, with home mycotoxin testing, guys, this is really important because the EMA is a good test. But the home mycotoxin testing, if it's negative, doesn't tell you anything. If it's positive, it tells you either have to clean better or you still have mold. If it's negative, it doesn't tell you that there is or isn't mold still. You need to look for the mold spores as well, which the EMA can also help you with there. But mycotoxin testing in the home isn't definitive. Basically, it only helps you if it's positive. If it's negative, it doesn't tell you anything. Urine mycotoxin testing from that same company is great, but home mycotoxin testing doesn't give you enough data. Really important to note on that front. And also it's important to note, and this is great from Microbalance because they offer all of these, is do multiple redundancies in testing. Do the mold plates, not just the air sample, tap test, right? Do the EMA, which is going to test for mold spores and mycotoxins. Redundancy in testing is important, okay? Are you taking new patients for consults? Hey, Alexandra, we do have room for new patients here at Keystone. We have myself as a practitioner, but also my associate, Dr. Aoki, who's fantastic. We do take new patients. We do initial visits remotely, and we do a lot of in-person and intensives for major cases. Feel free to call in. We'll do a complimentary discovery call to see if we're a good fit for you guys. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. We went over because I had so much fun answering questions and doing this, you guys. I love this on that front, to just chat with you guys, answer questions. I really appreciate Microbalance Health Products for having me. These guys have been so good to us. We love them and their products. And the reason I do these is because their products work. So check them out. Check out the article for us, guys, on that front. And everybody, take care.